in a very significant moment as a movement, as a partnership of churches, because it feels like there's this global acceleration of what God's doing across the world. We're seeing churches just making radical transformations, radical movements. And I believe we're coming into a season where it's just the nations are calling and crying out. And God says, ask of me and I will give you nations as your inheritance. And that's an amazing thing about God, that He has an inheritance for us that we didn't earn, but that He's given it to us. He's kept it for us. And as we go, and we are going a lot, I think I read out this morning, I think it was, we've had, in the last 6 months, 60 apostolic trips outside of a local nation that have happened just within our 412 partnership of churches. That's in the last 6 months. That's excluding conferences and regional conferences. So it's been amazing seeing how many of us are going. On an average weekend, you can follow Facebook and see teams all over the world ministering into contexts that are not their own. And as we go, I think there's a vital thing that we need to settle in us. And it's this. I want to preach about it tonight. It's living in view of mercy. We need to live in view of mercy. And what I mean is that as we go and as we do all this stuff with God and for God, we've got to continually remember that everything that we do is because of His goodness, kindness to us, that we did not deserve and can never ever earn. And as we live in view of mercy, I think we stay rooted in who we are and who God truly is. And God can do amazing things through us as we go into the nations. And so I want to share with you tonight a little bit about a view of mercy, how I came to my first view of mercy, and how we need to, and I need to live permanently in view of mercy. And what I mean is, everything that I do, I want to do it in the light, in view of the mercy of my God. And I'd love us as a movement to become known as, that's something that's in the DNA that we are. And obviously the scripture, Jono nearly stole my preach, but in Romans 12 verse 1, they'll put it up on the board for us. In Romans 12:1, Paul is exhorting the church in Rome, and he tells them, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Now, he calls for a deep devotion to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. But Paul knows the only way we're going to see a priesthood ever doing that is if they properly see mercy. It's in view of mercy that we respond a certain way. It's in view of mercy that we pour out our lives. It's in view of mercy that we are able to go and change the nations. So this thing of mercy is a difficult thing for us to grab and understand. And I think because deep down inside we are human. And there's still something of Adam inside of us, something of that sin that when the serpent said to him, you will be like God. You will know the difference between good and evil. And deep down inside of every one of us, there's this desire to be self-sufficient, this desire to even sometimes manipulate the ways of God in ways that would benefit us. And we quickly forget how much we need mercy. And we tend to congratulate ourselves when we're doing well and beat ourselves when we're doing badly. And you would know what I mean. You know, when you've had a week of no quiet times, the kid's been sick, the car's broken down, it's been a crazy week. And at the end of the week, you've forgotten that you got here in the first place by mercy, and you start to feel a bit, oh. But if you've spent an hour every day in prayer, walked the streets speaking in tongues, and led 20 people to Jesus by the end of the week, how do you feel? You come into worship like this. But actually, you're in as much need of mercy as the person that struggles through their week. And we forget that, don't we? I forget that. I find in myself, when I'm doing well in the Lord, it's like, yeah, God, I'm in your presence. And when I'm not, it's like, oh. And we need to have a view of mercy that sustains us and holds us and keeps us. My struggle was a big one because I grew up in the church. My parents were, they were really good people. To give you an idea, my dad in my whole life, I never ever heard him swear, which is quite a big thing, actually. He was just this amazing man. He did the books at the church, door duty at church. Was it really every weekend or very often on weekends, we would do work with charity and go to orphanages and old age homes. And I mean, my dad was like this model Christian, but he wasn't saved. He was a churchgoer. Every morning of my life, if I got up early in time, I would see him on his knees, praying at his bed. But he wasn't born again. You see, we come out of a culture which believes that, we kind of Christians, we're not Muslims. And so in the old days, Christians used to go to church. But it's kind of something that we're born into, like I'm a Jew. It's born into the Jewish nation. We're a Christian nation. And so we go to church and we do Christian stuff and we have Christian morality. And that was my father. And let me tell you, when it comes to Christian morality, he outperformed most Christians that I know that are born again. I'll give you an idea of that just to freak you out, and it freaked me out when I realized what he had done. One day he did charity work with the Lions Club, which is like a charity organization. And so he would go on weekends to old age homes and give up his weekend to love people that were old and families had forgotten them. And there was one little old lady that he started to visit, and no one ever visited her. And my father just took the time and loved her. Regularly he'd go away. Sometimes he'd come home late from work. He'd gone to just go and be with her. He didn't know anything about her. She was just a little old lady in an old age home that didn't seem to have any family. And so my father just tried to be there for her. What we didn't know is that she was a multi-millionaire. Back in the days when millions were actually worth something. I was only about 9 years old. And when she died, my dad went to the funeral, and the lawyer looking after her estate came up to him and said, "You know that she was very, very wealthy?" And my father said, "No, I didn't." And her kids have been fighting over what they're going to get for ages, but they never showed her love in her dying days. And you know what she's done? She's left it all to you. I was excited. I was 9 years old, but I figured millionaires. We're millionaires. Like, we've just got rich. Like, how awesome is that? And I remember my father didn't seem as excited as I was. He was wrestling with something. And finally, he sat down us as a family, and he said this to us. He said, "I can't take it." I said, "What do you mean, Dad? Like, we're millionaires, And he was like, "I can't take it because I was representing the Lions Club when I was visiting this old lady. And there's people that need this. And so I'm not taking a cent. I'm giving it all to the Lions." He wasn't even saved. He got saved years later after I came to Christ. I had the privilege of leading him to the Lord. And you just think, wow, so this is my upbringing. And my dad is an upright, moral man. And so when I grew up, I met these born-again Christians, and they were painful. They were like, I remember the first guy, his name was Paul Carey, and I ended up going to school with him. And we were on a farm, and we would drive over the mountain in a bus every day to school and back. And he would tell me that I was a sinner, and that I needed to be born again. And I used to get so mad at this guy. I was just like, man, he rubbed me the wrong way. It was just like, you're just judging me, and I'm a Christian. And I had all these lines, because, I was going to church. My parents made me. And then when I went to high school, he was on a farm. We ended up going to the same high school. And we got to share a dormitory, 4 of us in a dormitory at a boarding school. So from standard 6 to standard 9, what's that, grade 7 to grade 11, I think it is. Is that right? No, it's grade, whatever. You know what I am. Guess who was my roommate? And this guy just rubbed me so badly because he just was so perfect. He was like this perfect little goody two-shoes Christian. And although I wasn't a bad kid at school, I knew he was better than me in the sense of righteousness. There was a sense that he was just that when we told naughty jokes, he would break away from the conversation. When we were looking at girly photos, which is what you do at boarding school when you're unsaved, he would break away from the conversation and wouldn't look. And there was a sense of, ugh. And then, I really wanted this guy to blow it. I remember I even punched him once, just to see if he'd sin. But he didn't. It was so perfect. I was just like, because deep down inside, I didn't think I was bad. Deep down inside, I didn't feel like I was this evil person. Like, why would God not accept me? Because, I'm not doing terrible things. I do some naughty things, but I'm not a bad person. And that was my struggle. And so to tell me that I was a sinner, that I needed the mercy of God, was offensive to me. And I think you'll find that happens a lot when you walk the streets and try and tell people that they need Jesus. It's offensive to the human flesh. I don't need this mercy. I'm not this weak person that, And that's how I felt. When I left school, freedom. Boarding school, I woke up to a bell. I went to the toilet to the bell. Everything we did was by the bell. And when I went to varsity, my lecturers didn't care whether I came or didn't. And it was and I was in a boys-only school, so suddenly there were girls at varsity, loose girls. And I was unsaved. And it was like I actually went off the rails. Started off drinking, going out nightclubs. I lived for pleasure. I lived for surfing. Basically spent my days where I should have been in lectures surfing, and my nights hunting girls. And it was awesome. It was fun. It was fun. If anyone tells you sin isn't fun, they're lying to you. Burned my money that I got, the little bit that my dad gave me, drink, got into drugs, and I still thought I was actually good. I still didn't think I needed mercy. It was amazing. You just sort of compare yourself with those that you're hanging out with, and you think, well, I'm better than them, so I'm still all right. And then a year and a half into drugs, and I'll be honest with you, I felt I was a righteous drug addict. I did. I looked at drug addicts that just got stoned to get stoned, and I pitied them. Because I was spiritual when I got stoned. I used to have experiences with the supernatural. I was trying to find the God within myself. I used to meditate, and I believed that the Christian God at this point was no longer the true God. That actually I got to the point where I believed I was a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Really. I really did that. A demon told me that. A spirit appeared to me and told me that. You're a teaching spirit in my drug days. I better explain this, eh? Drugs opens you up to the occult, to hidden things. And through drugs, I'd opened a door to the devil, who's the deceiver. And he literally told me that I was a reincarnation of Jesus Christ when a being appeared to me and my friend Joey and told us these things. And I believed it, because it's not everyone that has a spirit appearing in front of them, and I did start. So I was like, I'm this reincarnation of Jesus. There's a girl in our church. She's just recently come back to the Lord. Her name's Jenny Lovemore. She used to come witness to us, and I'll never forget one day, I went to Joey's house, and she kind of popped in. She was a born-again Christian. And as I saw her at his house, I remember going to her and saying, hey, Jenny, and she started witnessing to me about Jesus, that I needed mercy. And I looked at her, and I remember saying this to her, Jenny, you don't know what you're talking about. You Christians are so narrow-minded. I said, if you're looking at me, you're looking at Jesus. I am God. She's in our church. You can ask her if I said this. And I believed it. I mean, I didn't believe that I was the God who created the universe, but I believed God's life force was in me. It's New Age thinking. Okay, you got it. I didn't know that I needed mercy. I got invited to a born-again, happy-clappy church. And oh my goodness, was that freaky. Just to see Christians doing this, not even this, just lifting their hands and clapping. And Christians were a bit nerdy in the 90s, I'm sorry, but they really were. Like, in those days, worship used to look a bit like this. As David did in Jehovah's side. And these Jewish songs, and it was like, I remember sitting in this church just thinking, I just want to get out of here, and I'm so uncomfortable with what's going on. This is not for me. But because I'd been brought up decently, I stayed thinking, when this meeting's over, I will never, ever come back to this church or any church like it for the rest of my life. And as this woman spoke, she was telling her testimony. For the first time, the end of her hour, for the first time, the lights went on, and I realized I have sinned, and I have fallen short of the glory of God. There's a difference when someone tells you that, and when it just, by the Spirit, it just kind of, I am a sinner. I knew it. I couldn't argue it. I knew I'd fallen short. I knew that I was in trouble with Him. And that place of revelation, that place of realizing I need mercy because I'm in trouble, was what began to change my life. And I had a wonderful encounter with the Lord, coming to the front, just experiencing mercy. I mean, I was sitting at the back of the church, and then you know where I'm at. And I wasn't stoned that night. I remember thinking, don't go to church stoned. It felt a bit wrong. So and I'm sitting at the back of this church, and I'm feeling for the first time in my life. I mean, I'm still a sinner. I haven't even got born again yet. But sitting in that church, I began to feel the love of God for me. But I'm aware that I'm sinned and I'm fallen short of the glory. It was this most amazing thing. I'm like, what is this? And I remember sitting in this meeting and thinking, God very powerfully got me to respond, and I came to the front. Demons are cast out of me. I was demonized. I was like Mary Magdalene and a few others. And I remember driving home, just going, I'm saved by the mercy of God. Like I'm saved, like I've fallen short of the glory of God, and He loves me. And Jesus died on a cross for me. A deacon in our church today, in those days, was one of my drug addict friends, a guy called Nicky Carstens. He was rolling a joint. These are all people in our church. You can meet them now. These stories I'm telling you, I've got witnesses. He was rolling a joint in the floor of our flat, and I remember coming into the flat, and he looked at my face. I hadn't said I'd gone to church because it wasn't cool. He looked at my face and said, what happened to you? Your face is different. Your eyes have changed. I sat down at him and I said, Nicky, he's rolling a joint. Nicky, bro, we deceived. The devil's deceived us. We need mercy. And sitting there with Nicky, the lights went on. I remember just sitting with this guy. I've been saved less than an hour. Sitting with this guy, and the lights start going on as he realizes he needs mercy as much as I did. And I didn't even know the sinner's prayer properly. I'd vaguely remembered this sort of prayer. Like I'm sitting with him, just pray this prayer, you know. And he accepted Christ as his Savior right there. Today he's a deacon in our church in Cape Town. Just this revelation of mercy, and it was mercy and grace for me. I remember just growing in this understanding of grace, but I struggled because I'd been a drug addict. And let me just tell you, a drug addict, it breaks down your willpower. It breaks down it's like you're weak in your flesh. And I struggled to be holy as a young Christian. I struggled to obey God. I wanted to. He'd done that work of Jeremiah, that new heart that I'd got. And for the first time, I wanted to obey Him in everything. But I was so weak in my flesh. It was like just to do basic Christian things was so hard for me. I remember every week for the first year of my Christian life, when the pastor said, is there anyone here who wants to give their life to Jesus? I lifted my hands because I realized I need mercy again, God. I've blown it so badly this week. I need mercy. And I would come to the front of the church. This is just where I was at. I was so broken. I would be almost depressed coming to church and say, God, I'm not worthy of you. God, is there any hope for me? And I'd come to the meeting, hear the preach, hear the gospel. Can there be mercy for me? Lift my hand. The perfect that evangelist must have thought he got so many guys saved. It was just me. I remember coming to the front every week and getting a wave of mercy upon mercy upon mercy. As God began to imprint this impression of His goodness in me, I began to grow with this revelation of it. I shaped surfboards. I called them grace surfboards. I had a car. I put grace on the back. It's just this revelation of the goodness and the kindness. I got a dog. I called her Grace too. I found a surf reef, which was arguably one of the best ways I've ever surfed in my life, and I found it. And I surfed it on my own. This was one friend for like 3 years. Guess what I called it? Agape. God's love. It was just this revelation of like the mercy and the goodness of God for me in my weakness. And then backwards and forwards. And then the greatest, the real, another massive turning point for me was I'd been saved about a year. I was doing better. I understood something of the grace of God. It was going well. But I didn't fully get it. It was like, you have measures or layers of revelation. Didn't fully get it. And I remember one Sunday, I'd been at church in the morning. I'd surfed the afternoon, and it was evening, and I didn't feel like going to church that night. You know what that's like. And I remember praying to the Lord, just speaking to Him in my room. I said, Lord, I hear so much about mercy, or so much about love. Show me what love is, and I'll go to church tonight. And I've shared this before. Some of you have heard this story, but it was such a profound, just as far as I know, I was taken into heaven at that moment. I was standing in my room, talking to God. The next minute, I was standing in heaven. And what I saw, I was standing on one side, and I had no theology for this. I was a young Christian still. As far as I could see, there were people with their hands lifted up, and they were singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." And I knew God was sitting on that side, but I couldn't turn my head at first. It was like something was stopping my neck. But I wanted to look to where God was. And as I was in this place, just watching this, just in awe of how big this place was and how just incredibly awesome it was, I saw it looked like if you throw a stone into water, you get that little ripple. It was like a ripple of light that began to move over the people. And as it moved, I saw their praise was going deeper. And as the ripple went past me and hit me, I felt joy, the joy of the Lord. And it was just this, the joy of the Lord it was just like the joy of God. It was beyond anything I'd experienced. And as I felt the joy of God hit me, I had to worship. I could not worship. How do you worship in a revelation of the joy of God? And as I began to worship, I could turn my head and see him. And he was sitting on the throne in the front, Jesus, on a throne with a purple robe on, a crown on his head. And I knew as I saw him there, he was King of kings and Lord of lords. You read that in your Bible, but when you see God, it was like nothing I'd never comprehended anything so big in all my life. And he was sitting there in his glory. And all these angels were just singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." And another wave, poof, would come out of his presence. And the peace of God. And I just worship deeper with them because the revelation of God just washing over us of who he is, and us responding, it was amazing. And then another one and another one. And then I remember he was sitting on his throne, and the Bible actually says this. I saw this later. The Bible says the earth is his footstool. And the best I can explain it, it was this little ball about the size of a tennis ball that I knew was the earth because I'd seen pictures from space. Just turning at his feet, just floating in space. And it was this little arbitrary little blob. Like, in the light of him, it was like, what is that little thing doing there? And I remember he looked down at it, and suddenly there was just compassion written all over his body, all over his face. And I remember he stood up, and heaven sort of, what's going on? I remember just having, what are you doing? What's going on? And he took off his crown, put it on, he had a purple robe, he took it off. And the next minute, I was standing at the cross where he was crucified. This is before Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, which is just such a great picture of what I saw. He was head down, blood. I had not seen blood like that in my life. Just blood everywhere. And I'll never forget, I realized when he was hanging on the cross, they nailed him through your ulnar nerve, which goes through your wrist and through your feet where they nail you. Now, your ulnar nerve it's a larger nerve than your funny bone. So if you've ever knocked your funny bone, you know what that feels like. It's like your ulnar nerve is a larger nerve than that. So when they nail you through your ulnar nerve, you can imagine how painful just that is. And then they're going to hang you up on a cross, hanging on those nerves. Every movement you make is moving the nail in those wounds. And it was just... And I'm standing like right in front of him, like he's this far in front of me, and I'm looking at him. His head's down, but I'm just looking at him. Same person that I've just seen, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And you suffocate on the cross. Blood loss or suffocation is how you die. And so I could see he was, and then he would kind of lift himself up. And just standing in front of him was just like, I remember being struck by how weak he was. Like, so frail. Like I could watch the life draining out of his body. I could just see the blood pouring out of him. And I'm thinking, why are you here? What on earth brought you here, God? And I remember he looked up at me eventually and looked into my eyes. He was beaten, just ribs, just wrecked, just blood everywhere. Looked into my eyes and he said to me, his eyes spoke to me actually. He didn't say this, let me explain it theologically, but bottom line is, this is what he said. Andrew, I love you. And I would have come to the cross to die if it was just for you. I'm paying the price you should have paid for the things that you've done. And I snapped at that moment back into the room, fell on my knees, sobbing. And I remember just lying in my room, just absolutely overwhelmed at the mercy of God that I've just experienced and going, I remember just saying these words, God, I can't pay you back, God. I can't ever repay you for what you've done for me, God. But I want to give you the rest of my life. I know it's not enough. I know it. But God, I'm giving it to you. I'm laying it at your feet. And when I had a proper view of mercy, my response without knowing Romans 12 was, I offer my life. I offer it all to you. Whatever you want to do with it, it's yours. And that was the defining moment for me, where it was like everything changed. And from that point, my life was for Him. Everything that I did was for Him. Everything that I wanted to do was for Him. I just wanted to glorify Him. I wanted to give Him everything that I had. It's so important for us to see mercy. And I think until you see mercy properly, I question whether you truly even are saved. Really, I think for me, you can know about, but, I believe in Jesus, but until you realize that you have sinned, until you realize that you have fallen short of the glory of God, not some quote in the Bible, but that you know that you do not deserve God. And then see Him in love, reaching out to you in mercy and saying, I love you, and I'm for you, and I've paid for you in full. That's the foundation of the Christian life. We need to see mercy. And there's a beautiful story Jesus tells about, or a thing that happened, the Bible tells us, that happened to Jesus that illustrates this point around mercy. And it's in Luke 36 to 47. And I'll just read it together. And then I want to just break down some concepts out of it. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. And then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I've got something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned towards the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house, and you didn't give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You didn't put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven her, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. I want to just break that story down, because I think there's some points that we need to just wrestle with and grapple with. The first thing I want to say is this. When we read the word Pharisee, we think, oh, that's bad. But actually, we need to put the Pharisees into context, because I think the Pharisees got a bad rap, to be honest. Let me just give you the history of where the Pharisees came from. If you remember the history of God's dealing with His people, the nation of Israel through the ages would rebel against God, they would be naughty, they would sin, they would not love Him. God would send prophet after prophet, and they would ignore the prophet, kill the prophet. They cut Isaiah into 4 pieces. They put Jeremiah in a well. They really didn't treat His prophets well. They didn't want to hear what he was saying. And it came to the point where God eventually said, He's slow to anger, but abounding in love. But there came a point that God said, I'm going to discipline my people. And He basically said, because of your many sins, I'm going to hand you over to your captors. I'm going to raise up Babylon, this heathen nation, and they're going to take you captive. And so Babylon rose up and defeated Israel, and men like Daniel were taken into captivity. And for a long time, Israel lived as slaves in Babylon. And at one point, the Jews began to think, this sucks, which is what discipline's supposed to do to you when God does it. It's supposed to get to the place where you go, this sucks. And so what they did was they were like, okay, how do we get out of this hole? How do we get out of being slaves to Babylon? I mean, we're the people of God. We shouldn't be slaves. Hasn't God promised us these promises? And they began to look through the scriptures. What must we do to get right? And a group emerged who were called Pharisees. And basically, there was no temple anymore because the temple had been destroyed, and that was back in Israel. They were in Babylon. And so the Pharisees emerged as a teaching group of Jews that basically studied the scriptures and basically said to the Jews, guys, we got to learn our lesson. We can't make the mistakes that our parents made. So let's turn our hearts back to God. Let's deal with our idols. And you know, from the leadership of the Pharisees, Israel never had any more idols. Actually, for the first time as a nation, they dealt with their idols. And by the time Jesus came, the Pharisees had adapted and grown, that they were this teaching group of people. And what they did was they were like, Israel, we are going to serve God with our whole hearts, right? So here's what we're going to do. God doesn't want his laws to be disobeyed. So what does that look like? Because our parents didn't listen, and look what happened to them. So when God says, thou shalt not work on the Sabbath, what does that mean? And they asked the question, and they would debate it and argue it. What does that mean? Because what happens if we sin by accident and God has to punish us? We don't want that. So what? And literally, I kid you not, these were some of the laws the Pharisees came up with. Don't spit on the Sabbath, because your spit might move the ground. And as it moves the ground, it might make a little groove. And you might, by accident, plant a seed. And your spit will water that seed and cause it to begin to grow. And so technically, you're farming. Another law they came up with. Don't walk through a wheat field on the Sabbath, because by accident, you might scuff a chaff of grain, break its shell open, and then you are working the grain to separate the wheat from the chaff. By the time Jesus came, they had this elaborate system, and the system was designed, Israel, we're going to love God, we're going to do this right. And that's why they were so offended at Jesus, because to the Pharisees, you're going to get us in trouble, man. Our parents did the stuff that you're doing. And they didn't understand that and that's why I think it was hard on the Pharisees, because actually, he knew deep down inside they wanted to obey God. And Paul was the Pharisee of Pharisees. God had mercy on him. So when someone says you're a Pharisee, which is kind of the worst thing you can say to a Christian, someone really doesn't like you like a Pharisee. But actually, if you see the Pharisees, you see a people that really were trying their best to serve God. And so you've got this man, he's a Pharisee, and he's sitting there, and this man's devoted to the things of God. It's not like he's like this carnal guy. He is seriously doing his best to be right with God. And he invites Jesus to his home, and the Bible tells us a sinful woman came. It doesn't tell us what sin, but the language implies she probably was a prostitute. We guess, but probably a prostitute, and somehow, and I can only imagine how this happened, normally the Pharisee wouldn't allow her in his home because she would contaminate his home. And so he's sitting at the table, and I'm guessing all the servants are hanging out, like Jesus is at our master's house. So they're all hanging out in the lounge, listening, around the table as Jesus is sitting there talking to Simon, and no one's guarding the door. And she sneaks in. And it must have taken great courage to sneak into a Pharisee's house, because she knew what he was like. But her hunger for the mercy of God drew her. And she runs in, and before anyone can stop her, she falls down behind Jesus as he sits down and begins to weep on his feet and then begins to dry his feet with her hair, trying to clean the mess she's made, and then pours this perfume, and we know these things are valuable. Another lady today was worth a year's wage. I don't know how much this one was, but she pours out this actually the thing she uses for her trade probably. Pours it out at his feet as an offering. And Simon, and I can understand why he was baffled, because he looks at this scenario and he thinks this man's supposed to be a prophet. If he were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman she is. He would run away from her. He wouldn't have anything to do with her because she's such a sinner. She's evil. And Jesus knows the man's thoughts, and he looks at him. And he tells this classic story. So 2 men owed her a rich ruler money. And now they could repay their debt. The one owed the equivalent today of 2 years' worth of wages, and the other owed the equivalent today of 2 months' worth of wages. Now, in those days, when you couldn't pay your debt, you were sold into slavery and you served the master until such time as your debt was paid in full, and then you were allowed to go free. So both of these men are going to be put into slavery, one for 2 months at least, or however long it takes to pay back his debt, and the other is going to be for... And Jesus says, the master lets them off, lets them go free. Who would be more grateful? Who would be the one who would respond with the most gratitude? And well, Simon says, well, obviously the one who had the most debt. And then Jesus makes this profound statement. He says this: her great love has shown that whoever has been forgiven much loves much. But whoever's been forgiven little loves little. And what he's really saying is this: Simon, you owe a debt that you can't pay back. You don't realize that you're guilty, like she's guilty. Yes, her guilt may be more than yours, but you owe something you can't repay. And so you're sitting there thinking that you're righteous. You're sitting there thinking that you've got it all together. She knows she hasn't. And so he says, he who's been forgiven little loves little. And what he's really saying is, if you had a proper perspective of mercy, of the fact that you have a debt that you can't pay, you'd be at my feet with her. But she realizes it. She's got a good view of mercy. And because she sees the goodness of God for her, she loves with all of her heart. And this is a great challenge to us as Christians, because there's a little bit of Simon that can creep into us sometimes. So now, actually, today, just a pastor in, I couldn't believe it. And in Orlando, these guys, this homosexual parade, and some Muslim guy kills 50 people. And some stupid pastor, Christian pastor, in the States, it's gone viral now. It'll pop up on your newsfeed in the next day or so. Gets up in front of his church and says, I'm glad. I just wish that more of them had died because they're disgusting. And I looked at this man, and this is going viral. Now it's just like the world. You can imagine what the world's going to do with that for us. And it's like you so are not representing Jesus. You're like that Pharisee looking at this thinking, you've forgotten that you were saved by mercy. And because of it, you've got this self-righteous attitude. And so often we can do that. We have got these self-righteous attitudes. Even in leaders, leaders can carry this self-righteous attitude like, I'm the man of God. Ooh. You've forgotten that you're saved by mercy. You've got your 5 bodyguards and your limousine, and I only sleep in 5-star. You forgot about mercy, bro. You forgot that you, just like the rest of us, you're in need of it today, like you needed it when you got saved. And I want to talk about that because I think we forget that we need it today still. We lose sight of mercy. I was saved 26 years ago. I've got a few more minutes. 26 years ago. And from the day that I got saved, my life was given to God. And I have served Him as well as I can for 26 years. I have run pretty much as hard as I know how to run for the glory of God. And I could do a boast like Paul would boast stupidly and say, as I look back over my life, there's been some very cool things that have happened through it. Like I lead a movement of churches that spans the globe. I started Freedom of Religion South Africa. It's got 6 million people signed up for it. I could boast about all the stuff. I lead Josh Jen. It's this like huge church in Cape Town with 20 congregations, and I could boast about all these things. Preached all over the world. But the thing is this: I am in need of mercy today, as much as I needed it the day I came to Christ. See, Isaiah tells me in Isaiah 64 verse 6, all of us have become like one who is unclean, and all of our righteous acts are like filthy rags. All of our righteous acts, not our bad acts, our righteous acts are like what? Filthy rags. And the wording, you can check me out, it's actually the word, Jonathan's laughing because he knows what the word is. It's menstrual cloth. Women in those days, when they bled at that time of the month, to stop them pouring blood out on their clothes, they would put a cloth over there. This was before modern medicine and those things. And so that cloth would catch the blood so that she wouldn't mess on her clothes. And God says, your good works are like that to me. That means, and I can only imagine that, sometimes I think we come into the presence of God like this. God, look at what I've done. Can you imagine? I remember once my daughter running into my presence. She decided she was going to bless us. She was still young, and we used to have to change her nappies. And so somewhere along the way, I think she realized that it'd be a wonderful blessing to us if she tried to help us. So she knew where the nappies were. She was probably one, walked into the room, opened the drawer, laid down herself, opened up her poo nappy, and it was one of those gooey poo nappies. Pulled it off and put a new nappy on for herself, and it didn't do a great job. And when she pulled her nappy off, she put her hand in the duty, and it was just like poo everywhere. And then she came out of the room and came up to me, and obviously thrilled at what she'd done. Like, Daddy, I've changed my own nappy. I mean, this saved you a lot of work. And ran into my presence like, Daddy, Daddy. And I remember just smelling and seeing this little thing coming towards me, and it was like, wait. I mean, it was just like, for her it was awesome. For me it was like, and that's actually the picture that God's giving us here. We run into his presence going, look, Daddy, look. And he's like, wait. The funny part of that story is she put her nappy in the cupboard and we didn't know where. And so we started noticing the smell in the room that we couldn't get rid of. And eventually MC started searching, and there it was in one of the drawers. It's just... But this picture is such a good picture for me of what it's like with us. We think we've done this good thing for God, but we forget that there's something in us as humans that perverts even the best things that we can do. And I know we say, well, we're filled with the Spirit now, and good works like that. But can I tell you, even filled with the Spirit, there is still enough of Adam in you that you will corrupt the incorruptible. You'll dirty the perfection of God. And God is perfect. Don't think he's on our standard. God is way above our standard. And so we run in and we think, I am squeaky clean. And God's like, oh, wait. Did you ever think that your good works, I'm preaching right now and I'm feeling the presence of God. This is about as good as I get. And right now, what I'm doing, if it were judged purely on merit, it's menstrual cloth. I can't boast. And so the question then is, why do we do good works? Why even try? If it's that disgusting, and it is that disgusting to God, why do I even try to do good things? And maybe to illustrate, I'll use another story. When my daughter was a little bit older than that, I remember coming home the one day, and she was at the table on her knees, and MC had given her a whole lot of paints, and she had this little page, a little white page, and she was painting. She was very small. And I remember, and she had this little look on her when I came in, and she looked at me and said, Daddy, I'm making something for you. And she was painting away. It took her like hours painting this painting. and then walked up proudly to present the painting to me. And I remember looking at this painting, and I honestly didn't know what it was. It was like she was so small. I mean, there was just mess and color, and I remember thinking, I can't let her see that I don't know what it is. So there was this little blob in the middle that was sort of yellow, and I said, "Is that the sun?" And she went, "Yeah." I was like, "It's beautiful, Enyah." And she chest out like this. And then there was the green. Is that the grass? Yeah! It was like I was recognizing. I mean, I was guessing. I was just, please God, give me wisdom here, because I don't even know what's on this page. And I can tell you this, that painting would have meant nothing to anyone else. But to me, that painting took the place of honor in our house. My little girl had made that for me. And I mean, I didn't know what it was, but the fact is she had poured her best into it. If my house caught alight and I had the most expensive paintings and I could save one, you know which one I would save? I'd save that one, because that one moves my heart like the best painter can't move it. And this is the picture of why God accepts it, because He sees that we're doing this out of love. He sees this woman pouring perfume on His feet, and He says she has loved much. God loves it when we try. I mean, He receives our stuff, but He does it because He's merciful. And He gives it value because He values it, not because it has any value in itself. The best we do when we come and we say, "Daddy, Daddy, look." And it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous love and grace that He gives us. I mean, what I'm doing now is that, I mean, He looks at my heart and He goes, "Oh, Andrew, if He were to judge me just without Jesus covering me, it'd be like, Andrew, this is falling short. I can't accept it. It's not perfect." But because of Jesus, He sees me trying. He sees me doing my best. He sees me trying to discipline my flesh and deal with my heart. And He goes, "Is that the sun?" Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. I want to put it up on my wall, man. I want to boast about this. People walk in, "Look at what my son did." I'm like this. You don't even know what it is. Ridiculous love and mercy that He gives us. And so when you come to God and you offer that which you have, the best you can do, He receives it as though it were the most awesome, beautiful thing in the universe. Because He sees behind a heart that says, "I've been forgiven so much. Here's my offering." And so this results, and Paul speaks about this, it results in offer your bodies as living sacrifices. When you find mercy like this, you want to give Him everything that you've got, because there's no one and nothing else in the universe that accepts you as you are in that place, even trying and falling short, and puts value on you and value on what you've done. God shows mercy. I remember the stories of some of the Jews when they were slaves and they were serving under a good master. Sometimes when they were allowed to go free because they'd paid their debt, if he was a really good master and he treated them well, sometimes the slaves would go, "He's been so good to me, I want to stay a slave." And they would pierce their ears, and that was a sign that I'm a bond servant now. And that means from now on, I'm a willful slave. I don't want my freedom. It's better to be in His house than the freedom that I've had before. So I'm going to willingly serve this man for the rest of my life. And that's earthly mercy and kindness. Because you wouldn't do that to a tyrant. When you get a view of God's mercy, the fitting response, "Here's my life, God. Here's my life, God. I offer my body as a living sacrifice, dedicated to the Lord." You see, Matthew 6:33, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness." This is the normal response when you've seen mercy. If you're struggling to give God your life, if you're still in love with the world and the stuff around you, it's because you haven't seen mercy yet. You got caught up and beguiled by the stupidness of carnal, pathetic little earthly things that are going to burn up. But when you see mercy, it changes everything. And I love this. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy. And what that's just saying is, what what you're doing and who you are set apart for God. You're set apart for Him. And holy means actually He receives you as though you like Him. I mean, to walk with God. I love, Mervis, Mervis, he's joined 412, which is awesome. He's going to start ministering with us. But worship leader, and I was chatting with him the other day, and he was telling me about a friend who loves God, and he's a Bible school student, and it's just, God, I want to serve you with my whole life. And the one day he was having his quiet time, and as he was praying to the Lord, he felt the Lord speak to him and say, do you know everything that you've been reading, it's all for you? And as a good student, he went, no, Lord. I'm a human being. You God. It's not for me. It's for you. It's for your glory. And God came again and said, do you know that everything you're reading, it's for you? No, Lord. It's not for me. It's about your glory. And the third time the Lord came and said, everything you're reading, do you know that it's for you? And it settled on him. And as Mervis told me, I realized the truth in it. The wonder of the mercy of God was that He loved us so much that He made our lives more valuable than His own. And He died on a cross. And in doing that, He showed, like a husband should show his wife, you are more valuable to me than me. Why do we read our Bible? Is it so that actually He does it because He knows the best thing in the universe is Him, and He's saying, this is for you. I'm giving you good things. It's mercy. Holy and pleasing to God. I love that. It's like I'm pleasing to Him now, and I know I'm not on one hand, and on the other hand, what I'm doing, Father's going, Andrew, my boy, well done. Lord, can you see that there's a sun here? And I know when I'm painting it, I'm going, God, can you see there's a sun? Because I know now what He's like. And He goes, of course, man. I know exactly where it is. God, can you see? Pleasing. It pleases His heart. And this is your fitting act or your proper response in worship. This is mercy. And when you live in view of mercy, it changes the way you deal with people. It changes the way you deal with God. It changes everything. In fact, you end up obeying the 2 commandments. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And love your neighbor like yourself, because you realize you need it as much as I need it, man. I can't look at you and judge you. I know how much mercy I've got. I've received so much. I've seen mercy and it's wrecked me. And as we move as a movement, a partnership of churches across the world, each one of us needs a deep revelation and a view of mercy. Because it's mercy that'll keep us running our race when we're tired and we want to give up. It's mercy that'll keep causing us to love others when they don't deserve it, because we know the love we've received we didn't deserve. It'll keep causing us to sacrifice and keep going to nations and paying the price and giving up holidays that would have been fun to go and serve others, because we want them to know the mercy of our God. It'll cause us to not boast, to think we're something, but to know that we're nothing. That we stand on level ground before the cross. We made everything because He loved us. And I love what David said. When you realize this, your fitting response is actually this. David said this in the Psalms. What is man that you are mindful of him? Like, who am I, God? Who am I? I'm dust. I have a good understanding of who I am. I'm about as valuable as a piece of Lego. Technically. Think about it. I'm created. Lego is made by somebody. Why would the creator die for the Lego? The only reason I value is because He loved me and died on a cross for me. And I live in view of mercy. And I want to pray with you tonight for a revelation of mercy. It'll drive you to your knees. It'll drive you to the nations. It'll drive you to run and not grow weary, to pour your life out as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God.